Master trapper and tanner Tom Oar gained a huge following when he featured in History Channel's Mountain Men.
For over a decade, one weathered face became the true heartbeat of a television series built on grit, isolation, and survival. Tom Oar was never the loudest voice on Mountain Men, and he never needed to be. He simply showed up, season after season, hauling firewood, curing hides, and greeting brutal Montana winters with the same calm patience he'd carried since his rodeo days. But somewhere along the way, that steady presence began to fade from the screen, and fans who had followed him for years started to notice. Where had Tom gone? Why did his appearances grow shorter, his scenes fewer, his silences longer? What follows is the story of a man who spent his whole life refusing to be beaten by nature, and who, in his final chapters, faced the one opponent no amount of grit could outrun: time itself. Long before cameras ever found him, Tom Oar was already living a life most people would call extraordinary. Raised in Rockford, Illinois, in a household where horses weren't a hobby but a way of life, Tom was drawn to danger almost from childhood. He and his brother grew up trick riding, and by his teenage years, Tom had already set his sights on something faster and far more reckless: professional rodeo. At just 15, he left home with little more than a rigging bag and a bull rope, hitching his way toward competitions that would define the next 20 years of his life. Throughout the 1960s, Tom built a genuine reputation in the rodeo circuit, competing as a bull rider and consistently placing among the top competitors in his division. It was a world of broken bones, roaring crowds, and constant risk, and Tom thrived in it. That world nearly ended his life in 1970, when he was thrown and trampled during a ride that left him unconscious and seriously injured. It was the kind of moment that forces a person to reconsider everything, and for Tom, it planted a quiet seed of change that took years to fully bloom. He didn't quit right away. He kept riding, kept competing, kept chasing that familiar thrill. But something inside him had shifted, and by 1981, Tom made the decision to walk away from rodeo entirely. He didn't see it as retirement so much as a redirection, trading one kind of danger for another, one that came without an audience and without applause. That redirection led him to Nancy, and together they made a decision that would shape the rest of both of their lives. In the late 1970s, the couple loaded their belongings into an old pickup truck, reportedly paid for with muskrat pelts, and drove into the wilds of Montana with no real plan beyond building a life away from modern comforts. What they found in the Yak River Valley was beautiful, remote, and unforgiving in equal measure. Winters there weren't simply cold, they were a test of endurance that could break unprepared people within weeks. Tom and Nancy weren't naive about the risks, but they were determined, and that determination carried them through years of scarcity, brutal temperatures, and physical exhaustion that would have sent most people running back to civilization. It was during a trip away from the valley that Tom stumbled upon a skill that would define much of his public identity: brain tanning, an old and painstaking method of preparing animal hides using the natural oils found in the animal's own brain. He was fascinated by it, and true to his nature, he didn't just dabble. He studied the craft relentlessly until he mastered it, eventually becoming known throughout wilderness and traditional skills communities for his handmade leather garments. Events like the Black Powder Rendezvous gave him a stage among fellow outdoorsmen, long before television ever noticed him. By the time cameras arrived, Tom wasn't performing a lifestyle for an audience. He was simply continuing what he'd already been doing for decades, and that authenticity is likely what made him resonate so strongly once Mountain Men premiered in 2012. Throughout the show's run, viewers came to see Tom not just as a skilled outdoorsman but as something closer to a symbol, a living reminder of a way of life that modern society had largely abandoned. He wasn't flashy. He didn't manufacture drama for the cameras. He simply worked, day after day, preparing for winters that could easily kill a less disciplined person. Nancy stood beside him through nearly every frame of that journey, learning to trap, hunt, and manage the same brutal conditions Tom faced. Their partnership became one of the show's quiet anchors, a reminder that survival in that kind of environment was never a solo endeavor. As the seasons progressed, though, longtime viewers began noticing subtle shifts. Tom moved a little slower. His screen time became less frequent. Episodes that once featured him prominently now gave him smaller, quieter moments. For a show built on physical endurance, these changes didn't go unnoticed, and speculation began creeping into fan communities. Some assumed he had simply grown tired of filming. Others worried something more serious was happening behind the scenes. The truth, as it often does with aging public figures living far from modern infrastructure, turned out to be more complicated and more human than most rumors suggested. Reports from later seasons indicated that Tom experienced a serious health scare, one involving sudden difficulty breathing that forced him and Nancy to make an urgent, lengthy drive to the nearest medical facility, since their remote home offered no quick access to emergency care. For a man who had spent his entire life avoiding hospitals, this was an unfamiliar and unsettling ordeal. According to accounts describing this period, doctors identified serious heart-related concerns and prescribed treatment intended to help manage his condition going forward. Whatever the specifics, it was clear that decades of physical strain, dating back to his rodeo years and compounded by a lifetime of wilderness living, had begun to catch up with him. It was a sobering moment for fans who had long viewed Tom as almost invincible, a reminder that even the most seasoned outdoorsman is still bound by the same biological limits as everyone else. What made this chapter particularly striking wasn't the diagnosis itself, but how Tom and Nancy responded to it. Rather than retreating entirely from the life they built, they adjusted. Nancy took on more of the physical workload. Tom continued working at a pace suited to his new reality, refusing to let a health scare define the remainder of his story. Their relationship, already tested by decades of isolation and hardship, seemed to deepen further during this period, transforming from a partnership built on survival into one built on quiet caretaking and mutual devotion. Of course, uncertainty breeds speculation, and few corners of the internet resist a good rumor. In 2020, a fabricated obituary began circulating online, falsely claiming that Tom had passed away. The timing coincided with his reduced presence on the show, and the combination proved convincing enough that many fans shared the story without verifying it first. Tributes and condolences flooded social media before the rumor was eventually debunked. Years later, in 2024, a similar rumor resurfaced, this time claiming Tom had died in Florida, a location tied to the couple's habit of spending off-seasons in a warmer climate. Once again, the claim lacked any credible sourcing, and once again, more reliable reporting confirmed that Tom remained alive, simply choosing to live with less public visibility than before. That desire for privacy shouldn't be mistaken for absence, and it certainly shouldn't be mistaken for defeat. Those close to the situation have suggested that Tom, now well into his 80s, has increasingly turned his attention toward the question every longtime outdoorsman eventually faces: what does a life like his look like when it slows down? He has spoken candidly, in a somewhat wry and self-aware tone, about the strange concept of retirement for someone who has never known anything but physical labor and constant preparation. The idea of easing into a quieter routine, potentially spending more time in a milder climate, isn't framed as surrender. It's framed as evolution, a natural next step for two people who have spent nearly 50 years adapting to whatever their environment demanded of them. Behind the health scares and the online rumors lies a family story that adds even more weight to Tom's journey. Long before Nancy, Tom had been married to his first wife, Janice Fraser, and together they had 2 children, Keely and Chad. Tragically, Keely passed away in 2015, a loss that undoubtedly shaped Tom's private world in ways the cameras never fully captured. Grieving publicly, even partially, is never easy, and Tom carried that weight while continuing to appear on a show that asked him to project resilience. His son Chad took a markedly different path, eventually settling in Florida and building a horse training business alongside his wife, a career that, in its own way, echoes the equestrian roots Tom himself grew up with, even as it unfolds in a far more structured environment than the Montana wilderness. Tom's older brother, Jack, has also played a quieter but meaningful role throughout the series, appearing alongside Tom in numerous episodes without ever seeking the spotlight himself. Their dynamic, understated and steady, added another layer to the show's portrayal of family, tradition, and the value of doing hard work without needing recognition for it. Beyond the show itself, Tom, Jack, and Nancy have also built a modest business around Tom's craftsmanship, selling handmade leather goods, knives, and traditional gear to fans who admire not just his television persona but the authentic skill behind it. That blend of old-world craftsmanship and modern exposure has allowed Tom to build a sustainable legacy well beyond his years of filming. In the end, the story of Tom Oar isn't really about mysterious disappearances or dramatic exits. It's about a man who lived according to his own rhythm long before television discovered him, and who has continued to do so even as his body has demanded adjustments along the way. His reduced screen time wasn't abandonment, and the rumors of his death were never more than noise generated by uncertainty and distance. What remains true, according to the most reliable accounts, is simpler and far more compelling than any fabricated headline. Tom Oar is still here, still working at his own pace, still bound to Nancy and to the valley they built their lives around. Whether he eventually settles somewhere warmer or continues splitting his time between Montana and Florida, his legacy is already secure, built not on spectacle, but on decades of quiet, authentic resilience. If Tom's story has taught viewers anything, it's that toughness isn't only measured in how someone survives a blizzard or handles a wild animal. Sometimes it's measured in how gracefully a person faces the slow, undramatic reality of growing older, adapting without losing themselves in the process. Tom Oar spent his life refusing easy paths, and even now, in the quieter chapters of that life, he continues to do exactly that.